Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your hosts Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir and I'm hosting today another solo episode talking about running backs ahead of the upcoming NFL draft, now currently less than a week away as we sit here on Thursday, April 22nd. And the running back position has been one that we've seen the Steelers attached to quite a lot. And I thought that it would be a good idea today in what is going to be known as Season 6, Episode 7, Part 2, to go over some notable running backs in this year's class. Austin posted an episode somewhat recently talking about 5 different running backs that he looked into, 2 of them being Najee Harris and Javonte Williams from North Carolina. And I'll get into my guys in a little bit here, what they did in college, their strengths and weaknesses, what I liked about them, what I didn't like, and what I think their floor and ceiling are, and whether or not they're a good fit with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But real quickly, to list my 5 players, I had Travis Etienne, the third of the 3 top-tier running backs that have been linked to the Steelers. I also have Michael Carter from North Carolina, who was Javonte Williams' running mate in college over the past couple seasons. I also have Chuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State. I have Trey Sermon from Ohio State. And finally, Elijah Mitchell from Louisiana Lafayette. So with that being the case, I'll get into them shortly. But first, why don't we talk a little bit about why the Steelers might consider addressing running back in this year's draft. So, I don't have to word myself carefully here. The Steelers' running game has been continually getting worse over the past 4 seasons. They had one of the best ground games in the NFL back in 2016. They had a good one in 2017, an average one in 2018, and the last 2 seasons it fell off a cliff really, with last year finishing dead last in the league. That despite having an effective rushing attack over the first 4 to 5 games of the season. They completely bottomed out, and it was one of the worst overall performances I've seen, not just from the running backs, but from a run blocking standpoint as well. The Steelers had very little success with the ground game, not just in terms of yardage and touchdowns, but also in terms of short yardage success too, which became kind of a punchline with this team over the course of the season. So one option in order to make a ground game better, which has been the edict, if you will, of team owner Art Rooney, which is to improve the ground game, improve the running game. I know it's been something he said in the past, but that being said, if the Steelers are going to do it, there's 2 ways to address that. Number 1 is by adding players on the offensive line. The Steelers have swapped out Alejandro Villanueva and Marquise Pouncey for Joe Haig and B.J. Finney at this time, while also re-signing guys like Zach Banner to the team. And we'll see if they add a tackle later in the draft. I talked about guys like Tevin Jenkins earlier in an earlier episode. But another obvious part of the running game is the running back position. As we know, James Conner has departed and signed a contract with the Arizona Cardinals, so the primary starter from the last 2 seasons is out the door. Only 6 running backs remain on the roster, and really if you want to condense that down to 5, if you want to include Derek Watt or not, that's up to you. Since he's a fullback, he's technically a running back, but we know based on the way the Steelers used him last year that him touching the ball, I think it happened only 2 times last season, and they were both in the Browns playoff game. So wouldn't expect him to see the ball much this year and won't be much more than a lead blocker special teams option. So what we want to look at here is the actual halfbacks. And what remains of this group is Benny Snell, who never took the step that was hoped of him in year 2. And actually, despite having a decent overall stat line once all was said and done in terms of overall touchdowns, the efficiency was just really off. And he was supposed to be the short yardage running back, and despite finishing, I think, with 4 touchdowns last season, he just had a lot of trouble converting. And outside of the notable stiff arm against the Ravens in the what was supposed to be the Thanksgiving Day game but turned into a Wednesday night game, he didn't really play well at all. If anyone has listened to this podcast before, they know my thoughts on Jaylen Samuels, and that is, I have an extremely low thought of him. At age 25 now, Samuels never took any steps at all compared to what he was. He had one good game his entire 3-year NFL career, where he had a solid game against the Patriots. And outside of that, he hasn't been billed as the receiving back he hasn't lived up to the receiving back moniker he received. He's not a very talented runner. He never was. He never touched the ball a lot in college. And he's not a great pass protector. In fact, he's probably the worst one on the team, maybe this side of Anthony McFarland. So Samuels has been a big disappointment. And Anthony McFarland, I can't call him a disappointment yet because he's played one season and he was sparingly used last year. But you're hoping to see a big jump from him, but based on what I was just talking about with Snell and Samuels, they have not been overly impressive in years 1, 2, and 3 of their respective careers. So that has to be a little concerning for McFarland. Those are your top 3 guys right there. A whole lot of unproven and disappointing so far. And the other guy they have previously is Trey Edmonds, who actually I believe had the longest run for the team 2 seasons ago against the Colts. But besides that, has been a special teams, primarily a special teams player, and has only been on the field occasionally as a member of the offense over the past 2 seasons. They added Kalen Ballage for a minimum free agent contract, and Ballage hasn't really gotten off the ground in terms of his NFL career. He is averaging a pretty measly yards per carry average over his career. I'm going to actually have to look that up because I'm pretty sure it's not good at all. Now, I will say his short yardage numbers over his career have been much, much better. But all in all, in terms of his career, which now spans 3 seasons, he's averaging just 3.1 yards per carry. And he does have 7 touchdowns, but wherever he's been, whether it's Miami, New York, or LA, he hasn't been much more than just a short yardage back. So a lot of unproven guys here. So it makes sense that if the Steelers aren't adding to this position before the draft, this is the clearest need for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I don't know where a lot of listeners fall on this. I get the feeling that they want the Steelers to take a first-round running back. I am firmly in the camp of not drafting a running back in the first round. I'm not a big fan of taking running backs early, but I can justify it in the second round or third round. I just don't think that running backs move the needle a lot. I've always been a big proponent of offensive lines and making a running back, and that running backs can break tackles, they can do all sorts of things, but unless if you're the unicorn of the group, you're Derrick Henry or a Christian McCaffrey, most of these guys are much more easily replaceable than other positions, not just on the offense, but on the rest of the team. We saw that in 2018, and we know now that James Conner was not able to hold up, but had he stayed healthy, as he was staying healthy in the early portion of the 2018 season, he was having quite an effective season and made the Pro Bowl. And that after the Steelers nearly paid Le'Veon Bell a contract that averaged $15 million a season, and Conner was getting paid like $1 million that year, something like that. Look, the point is, elite running backs do stand out, and they do help the team, yes. But if your thought process is, I'm going to look for a player like that, it's not the correct way to go about it. You shouldn't be going into a draft expecting to get the next Derrick Henry, the next Christian McCaffrey. You shouldn't be going in looking for, you shouldn't be going in looking at a receiver saying, I'm getting the next Julio Jones here. It'd be great if you did, and of course every team wants that, but what that fails to take into account is that there's a lot of players that get taken, a lot of variables. Most guys don't end up being Julio Jones for that reason. So trying to roll the dice on a guy and hope that he's something special, unless if he's a clear blue chip prospect like a Kyle Pitts or a Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell, I just think that that's a big risk. And even though the top of this running back class is pretty talented, I think it would be a major mistake to take a running back with the first round pick. Now, also including that, you have to consider the fact that fifth-year options are now fully guaranteed. And fully guaranteeing a first-round running back his fifth-year salary is essentially paying them, I don't know what the exact figure would be right now, but it's going to be right around $12 to $15 million, I would imagine. And that's a lot of money to spend on a running back. So unless if you are extending this player, which again, I'm not a fan of paying running backs either because of how replaceable they are, that means that you're going to be paying this guy either way, or you're going to let him walk after 4 seasons. So I know that a lot of times your draft picks aren't going to end up signing second contracts, but the Steelers do have a lot that sign second contracts. I mean, they don't every time, and sometimes they don't last past their first contract in the league like Jarvis Jones, but in the past 10 years, he's the exception. Even Artie Burns has gotten second contracts in the NFL. So I just think it's not something that bodes well, especially when you talk about the longevity of the position as well. Age 30 is a magic number for a lot of positions, but for running back, that number is really 27 years old, 28. Once they get past that, they're already pretty much done. So you're talking about a guy that, and Najee Harris, potentially, who's already 23 and a half years old. He'll be 24 before long. And I know that he doesn't have the same wear and tear that other players have, but it's just something to think about. And I understand the want to address such a position that's needing so much right now. Leaves a lot to be desired. But I just don't think that taking a first-round running back is a good way to build your roster. And in theory, going for it all, going for the Super Bowl like the Steelers have said they are going to this year, in theory, taking a running back in the first round then is okay, because that player would help the most. But I just don't agree with that personally, given the way the Steelers have been, the 3 playoff wins the past 10 years. I just think it's a better policy to continue, unless if you were right there, Final Four, Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl runner-up. I think it's bad policy to push the chips towards the center of the table like that, and instead just focus on roster building. But all in all, those are my thoughts on it. But with that being said, we can move on and talk about some of the running backs that I looked into. So first, I'm going to start with Travis Etienne, the longtime Clemson running back, at 5'10", 205 pounds, a senior. Played all 4 years with Clemson, totaled 70 touchdowns on the ground, 78 total touchdowns over his career, and racked up over 6,000 career scrimmage yards and just under 5,000 career rushing yards. This guy was a true workhorse running back for Clemson at times, especially in his second and third season there, totaling over 200 carries in his sophomore and junior season, finishing with 26 total touchdowns in 2018, and was a member of a lot of powerhouse Clemson teams. His performance did dip this past season. He did play in fewer games, however, he didn't crack 1,000 rushing yards, and his touchdown total dropped to the lowest it has been since his freshman season. So a little bit disappointing in that sense, but he was a consensus All-American, former ACC Offensive Player of the Year, a first-team All-ACC honor. So there was a lot to like about Travis Etienne and his production at college. And in terms of my tape analysis from what I saw, I watched 4 different games of his over the past couple seasons, and his biggest strengths I felt were his elusiveness and footwork. I think he's probably the most elusive back in this draft, at least just from in terms, my goodness, just in terms of his ability to juke, cut, and make guys miss. And I saw some really impressive juke moves on tape, and his footwork is a really big weapon for him. Even though he's not really small for that running back position, he kind of played smaller in the sense that he didn't seem to be like a big power back. He ran more like an elusive running back. And he spun a few good defenders in the ACC right into the ground with his slippery moves. Another thing with ETN that's really great is his overall just speed. He's a legit 4.4 type of player, and he was really fast on tape, at least to me. And the one thing you keep hearing about him is his big play potential. And it's a thing. It's definitely a thing with him. He can change direction quickly, as I mentioned already. He can make guys miss. He's fast. He can take those short passes. He can take a quick toss or just a simple run. He can take it the distance, and he can win races to the edge or to the corner. And that's just a guy that you talk about breakaway potential, a guy that can break off these long runs, these big plays. An explosive play machine. That's definitely what Travis Etienne is. And a specific attribute that I thought, or quality that I thought was very good, was his contact balance. And yes, I know he's not a power back per se, but if he's not outrunning guys, making guys miss, or just making great overall plays, he had this fantastic ability to not necessarily shake off hits or break tackles, run through guys, but he was able to sustain plays, drive through plays. He was able to bounce, not necessarily bounce off tacklers, but if he was being dragged to the ground, he could find a way to sort of spin out and as he was falling, get another yard or two. He always fell forward, and if he was getting spun around or he ended up being almost sideways with the turf, he could find a way to keep his balance long enough to get that extra few yards that got a first down or could get to the goal line. That was something that I thought was really impressive because it helps him grind out extra yards. And when the chips are down, when you need to run out the clock, when you need to get that critical first down, when you need that touchdown when you're sitting on the goal line, like the Steelers struggled with so much last season, ETN can get those extra yards. He might not be the most powerful, the strongest back, but he gets extra yards, he fights a lot, and that's fantastic. That's something you really like to see. Some things I saw that I didn't think were so great were, and I know this is going to be kind of contradicting what I just said, but overall short yardage. And I think that the issue with short yardage, and I'm not talking about in terms of he can grind out yards. The issue here is just simply his instinct to try to break out a big play, trying to bounce things outside or trying to make a bigger play than there needs to be. It's okay to take what's there. I thought that there were too many plays where, and again, there weren't tons, but there were some plays where you were just kind of left wondering why he didn't act a little differently on a specific play, why he didn't just push the line forward just an extra foot or two rather than just bounce a play outside because he knows he's fast. So, that's not an uncommon issue for young running backs. I expect that's something that he will get coached up with at the NFL level. And, as he's going to realize the athletes on NFL defenses are much better, he's not going to be able to outrun guys on the outside all the time. And the big issue for him is pass protection. And look, I just first and foremost, pass protection is not a thing college running backs do very well most of the time. So usually the first thing you have to look for as a positive is effort. And Travis Etienne does have effort here. But his effectiveness overall is really just a work in progress. He feels like more of a detour or just kind of a one of those construction cones that sits in the way rather than a full-on roadblock for blitzing defenders. Yes, he's 205 pounds, but like I said, he plays a little bit smaller than his actual weight. I wouldn't call him a horrible liability, but at the same time, he's definitely getting worked on a lot of plays. He's getting blown up. So if your best attribute in pass protection is that You basically stand in the way and let someone run over you. Well, maybe you slowed down the defender for a quarter of a second, but that's not going to help in the NFL. He's going to be a big problem in the NFL if he can't get better in this area. And again, he was much bigger of a receiving threat than he was an asset in pass protection. So that's not necessarily a horrible thing. But with the Steelers' offense, at least the way it has operated with Ben Roethlisberger recently, you need running backs that can pass protect. So that might limit his overall usage. And that leads me to my final point about ETN. Not something that's necessarily concerning, but is a bit of a question mark. And that's that he never had more than 18 carries in a game over, I think, his final 20 some odd games. And again, he does have a decent amount of wear and tear. I mean, he has almost 800 total touches in his college career. He played 4 seasons. I know that he got spaced out a bit. They didn't run him into the ground like Wisconsin did to Jonathan Taylor over his college career. But still, it just makes you wonder if he's going to be able to carry the load at the NFL level. Because he didn't really do that as much the last couple seasons in Clemson, particularly last season. So, just something to think about, because I don't think he is going to be one of those guys that's going to be able to play, the majority of the snaps at running back next season. It's going to take some time. If he can become a better pass blocker, I think he can be a bell cow. But right out of the gate, definitely not. Not in my opinion. What is Travis Etienne's ceiling? I think Travis Etienne could be a really good running back in the NFL for a number of years. I'm struggling to think of a good comparison to him right now, but Etienne is a guy that, again, has big play potential, and he can help you not just as a runner alone, but he's also a really good receiver. He wasn't lined up in the slot quite as much. He was mostly receiving out of the backfield, but he still did a really good job, I felt. And he's definitely a player that's going to be able to help a team out of the gate. I'm just not convinced that he's going to be able to be a full-time starter, a bell cow right away. Maybe in time, but not right away. So I could see him being... he could have maybe not the longevity of someone like Mark Ingram, but remember, Ingram has never really been the top dog anywhere he's been. He's always been a 1A, 1B type of guy, sharing the backfield. And I think that that's a great thing for ETN. I think that could be a really great ceiling. And again, maybe not the longevity, but I think he could be a good player for a while. And a while for a running back, that is. His floor is that he never becomes a great pass blocker, and he's just a big play guy that never really learns how to hone himself in and try to not bounce plays outside all the time. But even though that's possible, I still think that he's talented enough to be at least a solid rotational running back for the course of his career. So I think his floor is pretty high as well, just in terms of running backs anyways. So, all that being said, ETN is being graded as, again, one of the top 2 or 3 running backs, sometimes in some areas the top running back in this draft class. I can understand it. I didn't look at the other 2 running backs, so I can't speak to that. But what I can say is that ETN is definitely the best overall running back I saw, and he has the most flashy traits that stand out. So picking him would probably help a team's overall game. But again, as much as running backs can, I don't think that they can do a ton more than the next replacement level guy. It all depends on the offensive line. But that being said, ETN is a guy that could be the first running back off the board. And right now it's a question as to where that could be. It could be as early as Miami at number, I think, 18. But I could also see running backs perhaps lasting until the second round. So somewhere between pick, say, 18 to 60. I know that seems really wide, but I could understand why teams wouldn't want to take running backs, A, and B, if there are top running backs taken, maybe he's not the one that the team taking a running back is wanting. So it's possible that he could be the third one off the board as well. But all in all, really solid player. Liked what I saw from him. He should be able to become a nice part of an NFL offense year one, but again, just not a top contributor, just not the guy, at least not right away. All right, next on my list I have Michael Carter from North Carolina. So Michael Carter is the more unheralded player from UNC, as opposed to Javonte Williams, who's getting a lot of love, and quite deservedly so. But I would also like to talk about how Michael Carter has been a really impressive running back for the Tar Heels, especially over his last 2 seasons, racking up over 1,000-yard seasons in each of them, and finishing as a productive team captain and a former All-American and All-ACC selection. So he was able to do quite a lot at North Carolina, and even had an impressive 300-yard rushing game against I want to say Miami, which I actually ended up watching over the course of my pre-draft process here with him. So definitely another accomplished running back, similarly to Javonte Williams. And in terms of the things I saw from him that I really liked on tape, the first thing was just his vision, his patience, his sort of feel for letting plays develop. I thought Michael Carter did a very good job of waiting to let his block set up before he decided to make his move. He didn't run past his guys often, but he only did when he knew that there was something there, or there was a play that he needed to convert on. He did a really good job of finding the hole, making subtle little cuts to get through them, and I also thought that he was a really good runner when it came to just cutting back, solid cutbacks. Getting into the hole when there wasn't much room there. So, he's a heavier guy for 5'8". He's bulkier, I should say, but he doesn't really play like a power back per se. Besides the subtle cuts that he makes, he really is pretty elusive, and he has good footwork for a big man. I was pretty impressed by that. Beyond that, he was a really good short yardage runner. I thought he was really good. I can't speak for Javonte Williams, but Michael Carter was a really good short yardage back. Again, he's small enough to be able to sort of squeeze into small areas, small holes, cracks that he could run through. And he did a good job of falling forward on these short running plays. He can get the job done for you anytime you want. And he has a nice downhill running style. Again, not all the time, but when you need it. So I like that. And just his overall effort and push. He's not going to cheat you for effort, ever. He fights for every yard. He pushes the pile. Keeps those feet driving on every play. And this is a debated topic. I don't know where everyone else stands, but I like it when running backs stick it out, or really just players in general stick it out and fight for extra yards when they're running on the sideline. And they don't have to do it every time, obviously, because it could be dangerous, but when they need that yard, they'll get it. And if not, if it's a situation where the game's in hand, he runs out of bounds to avoid hits. That's a smart play. That's a smart football play by a guy that understands the situation. So I thought that was pretty good. And also, I thought Michael Carter was a pretty underappreciated, or maybe underrated receiver. Yes, he's not Christian McCaffrey out there, but he caught 82 passes in his college career and scored 6 touchdowns. I thought he was really solid. I thought he was a pretty good receiver. And just overall, I had a lot of difficulty finding any weaknesses in his game. There weren't a ton of things that stood out to me, but there were several things that were really good, but most of all, I couldn't find one weakness in his game except for his pass protection. Now, elephant in the room, he's 5'8". So he's not the biggest guy when it comes to being on the football field. And that can be a bit of a detriment, even when they're built like Michael Carter is built. Kind of like, a stockier 5'8" comparatively to Anthony McFarland. But still, when you're taking on linebackers that are 6'4", 6'5", like Zaven Collins is coming out in this draft class, or Vince Williams. I mean, think about poor Michael Carter trying to stand up to Vince Williams in the hole. That's not pretty. And it's not surprising that he struggles in this area. But it is concerning because it limits his upside, not just as a pass blocker, but in his overall usage. He's probably never going to be a great pass blocker, which means he's never going to be a bell cow do-it-all running back, which means he's not going to be a guy you can put out there every play. So how much value are you really getting if you're drafting Michael Carter? Well, again, good runner, good receiver, does just about everything well, but he can't pass block. That's a pretty major hole, and maybe he can become at least adequate, but he's got work to do if he's ever going to get there. Right now, it's not pretty. Again, there's the want to, which is great in him. He's not afraid to do it, but unless if he gets better at it, this is a pretty major hole, major flaw in his game. Michael Carter's ceiling. I'm trying to think of there aren't a ton of shorter running backs like that. The easy comp is like, oh, he runs like Jerome Bettis because wasn't a very tall running back, but he was bigger, obviously. Michael Carter's not that. He's a modern day running back that can catch the ball and can do just about whatever you want. He's fast. He's not blazing fast, and he can catch. Like I said, he can catch the ball. He plays like a mix between a scat back and a power back, but he's a smaller back. I got to be honest, I really liked Michael Carter's tape. I thought he was very impressive, and I do understand that North Carolina had a very good offensive line, and they were able to run roughshod all over the rest of the ACC all year long. But I still think Michael Carter's a very good player, and his ceiling, I think he could be a good running back for a number of years. Again, I don't think he's ever going to be a guy somewhere, or maybe he is as part of a committee. Maybe he's I keep coming back to Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. I've got to think about something else. Maybe he's the Philip Lindsay to Royce Freeman type of or Melvin Gordon type of thing there. Regardless, the point is that he can do a lot and he can help offenses, and I think he will for 5 to 7 years if he stays healthy, but the pass protection thing is going to keep him from being an elite running back in all areas, that is. He could be a great runner and receiver, but I don't think he'll ever be considered a top 5 running back in the NFL just because he's got those issues with his size. Now then again, Jamal Charles could be an exception, but I don't know that they have similar athletic profiles. In fact, I know they don't. But still, he's got a pretty high upside. And his downside is, again, similarly to Travis Etienne, he can still find a role in an NFL offense, but he's just a quick rookie contract guy. The size thing could be a bit of an issue, and even though he played pretty fast in college, the NFL is a whole different game. So he might be stuck in a situation where he's not a speed back, he's a shorter running back. He's just going to have players in front of him that can do what he does better and can either also pass protect, or they have another running back that's specifically asked to do that. So he could find himself at the bottom of the depth chart fighting to get playing time over the course of his rookie contract and could be just a one-and-done NFLer. But I think that even though that's a low floor, I think it's more likely he reaches his ceiling. In terms of his overall projection, Carter's peers getting a lot more talk for obvious reason, but I thought he was the most impressive back after these top 3 guys, and seems to have a pretty consensus round 3 grade on him, and I'd take him there in a heartbeat. I know that the Steelers have had their issues with drafting running backs lately, but I think he'd be a guy that could help your running back room, improve the depth there, could add another element with better short yardage running, and I think he'd be a good addition for a price that's not that expensive. So I think that he'd be a great addition to the offense. So that was Michael Carter from North Carolina. Next I have Chuba Hubbard, the Oklahoma State running back. Very accomplished running back with the Cowboys. Did suffer a bit of a setback in his final season at Oklahoma State. In terms of his overall workload, though, or his overall body of work, still a very accomplished runner. Over 3,000 career rushing yards and 33 rushing touchdowns. 36 touchdowns in total to go with 53 career receptions, and a former second-team All-Big 12 selection and a former first-team All-American and Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, too. And he was also first-team as well. I mentioned the second team. So I'll get right into what I liked from Hubbard and what I saw on tape. I saw some 2019 and some 2020 tape with him. The thing that's apparent right away is his speed and his burst. It's evident right away when the crease forms. He has blazing speed to take advantage of either a misplay in the secondary or a hole that opens up quickly. And even though he's not great at making guys miss, that raw speed is something that's really nice to be able to hit the hole while it's there and take what the defense gives you as quickly as possible. Agility isn't quite as strong as his straight line speed, but I think some of the issues in this past season can be attributed to an ankle injury. Another thing that's a positive in his favor is his 2019 season, which was fantastic. Just the season in general, he had 300 plus carries and caught 23 passes as well. So he had an excess of 350 touches on the season, had over 2,000 yards on the ground, and nearly added another 200 through the air. He really showed that he could be a bell cow running back, at least in college there, and that's not something you see very often. Yes, you'll see a lot of productive backs, but even Travis Etienne was not the only productive runner at Clemson. And the fact that Hubbard was basically the guy for that offense in 2019, I think is an impressive showing, and it bodes well for him that he can be durable at the next level. Now again, the injury concern, because he did have an ankle injury last year, is important to note. It's not something you should ignore, but at the same time, leading the nation in touches by far last season and not looking worse for wear during the course of the season is encouraging. So yeah, you can have your concerns about the ankle injury, but I don't think it's something that's necessarily going to be a problem going forward. It's not something that looks like it's going to linger for him. On the flip side, I have more negatives with him, and I was sorry to say that because I am someone that follows Oklahoma State, but issues I saw with him most notably is really just his overall effort and push and his ball security. Those are the two big things from him. He doesn't have a very strong lower body. Short yardage running is not really his thing. He really struggles to grind out those yards like Michael Carter and Travis Etienne could. He doesn't go down right away, but he's not going to turn a play where he's hit at the line of scrimmage into a 3 or 4 yard gain. He's going to either go down right there or he's going to fall forward. That's about it. So he's not going to get you those extra yards that you want to get. And again, I just mentioned ball security. He fumbled 7 times in his final 2 seasons at Oklahoma State. Had a lot of problems with carrying the ball away from him. And fumbling is something that's going to get you kicked out of the league very quickly if you can't get that corrected. So that's something he needs to get worked on and get work done on it very fast. Elsewhere, his pass production was just really bad. I was led to believe he was a train wreck in this area. I didn't necessarily agree. However, his abilities here are quite limited, and Oklahoma State tried to hide him with play action or running him out on quick routes, but he's just lacking play strength overall. He'd get blown up by powerful blitzers. If he wasn't performing a straight-up cut block, he was basically useless out there, just kind of standing around. So definitely a liability in this area. And another negative is his contact balance. I was not impressed in this area. Chuba Hubbard didn't run like a powerful runner, kind of like I've already talked about. And that's not unforgivable, but I just was left wanting so much more from a guy that put up over 2,000 yards and is over 6 foot and over 200 pounds in general. You want a guy like that with that size and speed to be able to run harder, run with more authority, and he just can't. Or at least last year he couldn't. I still felt like he didn't, even on his 2019 tape, though. So maybe that says more about Tevin Jenkins and the Oklahoma State offensive line. Also, there have been some that were saying that defenses, quote-unquote, figured him out this past season and his running style. That's another thing, too. Oklahoma State ran a lot of zone blocking schemes only, so that's not something that's super common. I know the Ravens ran it a lot in the Joe Flacco days, but there aren't many teams that run outside zone, like almost exclusively these days. Some teams do it, but when you consider that that's basically the only experience he ever has is on zone runs, you're limiting the number of teams you can go to where you're going to be a good fit. So you're talking about a guy that not only has the fumbling issue, not only struggles in pass protection, but you're also talking about a guy that might struggle to fit in and become a big-time contributor right away. And for running backs who have a smaller learning curve, that might not be a huge issue, but you're adding up negatives here, and that's not good. So overall, Hubbard's stat line reads really well, but to be honest with you, him coming back for his final season at Oklahoma State was really just a poor decision overall. A, because he got injured. B, because he didn't play as well. C, because he was in the headlines for stuff about Coach Mike Gundy, which I'm not really going to get into, but apparently that made waves. So there were people taking notice of that and wondering if that whole situation led to him not playing as well, which I don't really agree with. But in any case, his drop-off from his sophomore season to junior season was concerning because he was looked at as one of the top running backs coming into this year. And after his poor season, he's fallen off so much that he's now being looked at as a guy that could be taken sometime in day 3, which would have been shocking a year ago. According to PFF, furthermore, his breakaway percentage, which is percentage of runs that went for 15 or more yards, dropped basically was cut in half from 32.7, which is insane, I will admit, to 16.5%. Beyond that, his yards after contact per carry dropped almost a full yard and a half, I should say, from 3.96 to 2.5. So there's a lot of issues here to work through. How much of it was just the injury? I don't know. I think it has something to do with it. But overall, this dip in production was quite concerning. And he only caught 8 passes in 7 games last season. So he wasn't an active part of the passing game either. His projection of a mid-day 3, round 5, round 6, I understand it. And I really wish he hadn't played last season because it just... I would have loved to have had him, but I just don't think he fits in with the Steelers well. So I don't know if he's worth the pick unless you've already addressed the position earlier in the draft. And again, why would you add 2 running backs in this draft? So, I don't know. Wanted to like Hubbard more, but just could not. Up next is Trey Sermon from Ohio State. Trey Sermon was a former running back at Oklahoma before transferring as a graduate transfer to Ohio State. And he finished his career with just under 3,000 rushing yards, 29 touchdowns in total, and just under 500 receiving yards as well. It was obviously a big part of Ohio State's run to the college football playoffs, through the college football playoffs this season, and ultimately to the final against Alabama. But Sermon was a guy that really exploded in the playoffs, and that's where a lot of his recognition comes from. So let me get into what I liked about what I saw from him. Number 1, similarly to Travis Etienne, I really liked his contact balance. If it weren't for Etienne probably being the best I have seen in this class, I would think that Trey Sermon's contact balance is second to his. He did a really good job of spinning around with his hand on the ground, trying to get some extra yards. He has a really powerful core and positions himself properly to, if not stay upright and continue going down the field, at least get those extra few yards that you need. So that's really good. Sermon is a unicorn in this instance, though, and I was really excited to see. I thought he was pretty good in pass protection. He's not perfect, But for running backs in college, as we've heard through all of these guys that I've looked at, he's the only one that I thought that was solid in pass protection. I think he needs to do a better job of trying to find a guy to block, but sometimes that's the blocking scheme that you're asked to do. So I'm not going to criticize him too much for that. He's really strong. Strong runner. Standing at 6'1" and 215 pounds, he's big and he plays big. Pretty good technique too. He'll dig himself into the ground and really take on those strong on-charging linebackers pretty well. He stepped into some guys on tape as well and delivered some pretty powerful shots. He can definitely help out a quarterback who needs an extra blocker or an offensive lineman that needs a chip. He doesn't just chip, but he can do it, and he's a really, really solid pass blocker, and that's not something you see in running backs at this level very often. So I was very encouraged to see that. Furthermore, playing like a normal power back, he gets a good extra push, which is always nice to see as well. On the other side, his negatives, some things I didn't like about his play, just his overall speed, athleticism, which, considering how big he is, it's not that surprising. And he does have deceptive speed when he gets going, but his burst just isn't that great. And I'm reminded of Darren Hall at Pitt from a couple of years ago. Darren Hall had a ton of explosive plays and was a guy that it was like, oh, he'll just have all these big runs in the NFL too. Well, not necessarily. Hall was able to take advantage of weaker defenses at the time and slower players with his brute power being able to extend these plays into longer plays. And I think that Sermon's going to have a similar issue that Hall had, which is you're not going to be able to outrun these guys, even if you do run over a couple guys. So Sermon's going to run into that issue. Maybe not to the same degree, but it's not something where he's going to be able to rely on these explosive plays as often. So he's not going to be a guy like Travis Etienne that's going to be taking a bunch of plays long down the field. Another thing that was disappointing was his just overall ability as a receiver. He finished with 48 career receptions, but he never had more than 16 in a season, and it came in his first year at Oklahoma with Baker Mayfield. So, his overall impact as a receiver just never got a lot better. He only had one touchdown after his first season as well through the year. He did have some snaps lined up in the slot, but he just wasn't much of a factor at all. He can do swing passes, screen passes, but I mean, if you get a running back that can't do that, why is he on the team, So I felt he was pretty weak in this particular area. And then another thing that he struggled with is just his overall elusiveness. And again, he's not an elusive guy. He's a power back, but he's just not going to be able to make guys miss. So again, he's just limited in terms of his athletic profile as a running back. You're not going to see him break away from guys. You're not going to see him make a ton of guys miss either. So he's a lot closer to a modern day plotter than he is a do-it-all kind of guy. I kind of think of him like Jonathan Dwyer, if Jonathan Dwyer could block. And that might be a bit insulting, but Jonathan Dwyer was okay for a few years. So, but Trey Sermon is a guy in the mold of a Steelers running back, besides Anthony McFarland. Sermon at 6 foot, 200 plus pounds, would follow in the mold of other recent draft picks before him, like Jalen Samuels, James Conner, Benny Snell before him, and could contribute to the offense. I do like a lot of parts about Sermon's game. Powerful, strong, he's got subtle moves, not great, but I don't think he's good enough in any spot besides maybe short yardage to be anything more than just a one-trick pony, a short yardage guy or a guy that could grind out yards. He's not a receiver, so he's not going to add any element there. He can pass block, which is great, and I think that that's awesome, but if he's in there, he's either running the ball or he's going to block, which is two things, obviously. But he's not a threat to catch the ball besides screen passes. I think his pass protection quality is fantastic. When it comes to college running backs, you're not going to find a lot of guys that can do what he does. and that should make him an attractive option to any NFL team. But again, his limited upside in terms of his athletic profile is the reason why he's not going to be mentioned with the other top running backs. Just not fast or agile enough. Regardless, I think his ability should give him a role in the NFL, and he's been projected as a late round 3, early round 4 type of pick, and I understand that and I agree with it. His performance in the playoffs last season really helps, and I think too that he can handle the workload in the NFL, but given the way the Steelers' picks have gone at running back the last few years, and I mean just in terms of they've got so many guys like Trey Sermon already, I'm not sure if adding a guy like that necessarily helps in any way. So I wouldn't hate it, but I would just have my questions about it until I saw him on the field. So that was Trey Sermon from Ohio State. Finally, I have Elijah Mitchell from Louisiana Lafayette. More of an unheralded prospect, a 2-star player in high school, and played consistently over his final 3 seasons at Lafayette. Really just kind of flies under the radar, a lot like Louisiana Lafayette does. But man, I was pretty impressed with this play, I gotta be honest. And it's kind of funny because Elijah McGuire came out of the same school back when we were doing our first draft analysis 4 or 5 seasons ago. And he was one of my favorite players that draft class. And here we are, another running back named Elijah from the same school. And I won't get too into it right away. I'll develop it over time. But I thought Mitchell was a really good player and was really productive. Over 3,000 career rushing yards and 41 touchdowns. Pretty good. And when you consider the fact that he was splitting time in the backfield every year, that's pretty darn good. And if Michael Carter played like a bigger running back despite being 5'8" and 199 pounds, Elijah Mitchell at 5'11" and 218 pounds plays smaller than he actually is. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in terms of his footwork, his elusiveness. I thought his ability to make guys miss with his feet was pretty darn good, considering the size he has to deal with. He knows how to use his feet simply, subtly, to either put him in a stronger position to get extra leverage or to help him set up a block that'll get him extra yardage. He's got a strong lower body that helps him. I think he's got pretty good footwork too. I was also a fan of his ability to push with a powerful lower body, and that helped him in short yardage, where he wasn't elite by any means. There were instances that I felt that he packed up other cracks and holes at the goal line, but oftentimes he's one of those guys that has to get his engine revved up, get a little steam before he could really get going. But Elijah Mitchell was, again, a really strong runner. And his pass protection, I didn't think was bad. He needs a lot of work in terms of his overall technique, and he wasn't asked to do a ton, but he was strong enough to hold his own against blitzing linebackers. There's some potential. He needs to be coached up. But as long as there's not a guy directly in front of him, he does look like a statue out there. He's just kind of standing around. So there's some moldable skills here. When you're talking about power backs, though, obviously you're going to talk about issues with speed. His speed is just not great. Similarly to Trey Sermon, he needs a lot of space to get up to top speed, so he's not going to be having a ton of breakaway runs in the NFL. And also, I thought his contact balance left a lot to be desired. For a big guy, this is the negative part of where he plays smaller than he actually is. He does have a stronger leg drive, but he doesn't stay on balance very well. He can get knocked off balance pretty easily. I felt that he should have been able to break free of other attempts, but just could not. So maybe that's just something where he needs to... In fact, I know it is. I know he needs to run with his pad level lower. So, again, not a completely polished runner. So, some good, some bad with Elijah Mitchell. But I think there's a good player here. So, again, for Elijah Mitchell, built like a true power back, but has yet to fully unlock his potential as one. He's got good vision and has an ability to convert in short yardage, but if he doesn't lower his pad level, he's not going to truly be a good power running back. The big plays he had in college are going to evaporate in the NFL because of how much faster the defensive players are. With that being the case, I thought that Mitchell's pass protection and ability as a receiver were two things that were kind of under the radar pretty good, though. Neither were great, but they were good enough to make me think that he could improve in both of those areas, and maybe he's not going to be an elite running back, but he's going to be a guy that should be able to stick, at least for a little bit in the NFL. Based on what I saw, I think he'd be a good part of any committee in time. It may take a little time, but I think he's a good runner, and there's potential there as a pass blocker and receiver too. So right now he's projected as a mid to late day 3 pick. I understand it, given the small school. He only had 44 carries against Power 5 opponents, so that's probably going to make some teams balk. But I'd love it if the Steelers thought about bringing in this guy if they don't address the running back position early. So I think that would be a pretty good choice. Really solid player. Didn't love him, but I liked what I saw from him. In terms of my favorite and least favorite prospects, in terms of fit, I already talked about it earlier. My favorite guy was Michael Carter. His biggest issue in pass protection is hard to ignore, but it's really the only true hole I could find in his game. He's a great runner, efficient, and runs hard. He's a good enough receiver. I think at worst, he could develop into a 1B running back. I see him as kind of like a smaller version of Kareem Hunt. And remember, Hunt led the NFL in rushing his rookie year. He was awesome. And where was Kareem Hunt taken? The 3rd round, just like where Michael Carter is projected to go. So yes, give me that over a first rounder any day. I'll take Michael Carter. Last I have on here Chuba Hubbard. Probably not surprising based on what I was saying before. I always get worried when you talk about a player that regressed from one year to the next and is going into the NFL. This was a guy that was not long ago was seen as maybe the top running back coming out. His play 2 years ago far exceeds what I saw last year, and there's still some workable traits, but he's got a lot working against him, whether it's pass protection or the offense he runs in, or the fact that he doesn't really run as strong as he probably should, given his size. So if he's not going to fit and he doesn't have much upside, why would you even waste a pick on a back then? You might as well take someone else. So that's why I have Chuba Hubbard last. So with that comes to the end of Season 6, Episode 7, Part 2 of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Again, my name is John Keir. Thank you for joining us and listening to me talk about running backs and why you should never take them in the first round, and furthermore, why some of the guys I've been talking about today are better than others. Who do you think the Steelers should take in the first round? Should they take a running back? Which running back should they take? Should they take one of the top 3 guys, or should they wait? Tell me what you think. Email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com or tweet at us. Tell me I'm an idiot for saying that the Steelers shouldn't take a running back with their first pick. @stronger_steel. Go right ahead. Go do it. In any case, thank you, as always, for listening. Until next time, have a great day, and thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.